ending. Let's talk about somebody now switching gears that unfortunately did not avoid the knockout and has not avoided the knockout against some very heavy-handed people, Derek Lewis and now Sergei Pavlovich. I'm talking about Mr. Curtis Blaydes. He's one of the best wrestlers in all of the heavyweights division in the UFC, but his Achilles heel seems to be these really heavy power punchers. And what is really bad for him is that he was locked in there with a guy who's not only a heavy-handed power puncher, very similar to Francis, very similar to Derek, but I will say a much more accurate puncher in Sergei Pavlovich. He has one-punch knockout power, and he throws his punches in combinations. So I think this was a beautiful demonstration by Pavlovich. I think he has now demonstrated that he's the very clear number one contender. Tough night for Curtis Blaydes. But first, let's talk about Pavlovich's performance. What did you make of it?
Well, he's really looking good. And they showed a stat. He's got 6, I believe, first-round knockouts in a row. So that's something that the UFC loves, the fight fans love. And, you know, he's that scary Russian. There's never going to be a time in combat sports where the character that is the scary Russian isn't cool. That
The Ivan Drago.
Exactly. And he's even got the blonde hair. He's massive. Every time, you know, Khabib was like that, but he's way smaller and you know, just it doesn't have the same optics of a Sergei. But I think this Pavlovich experiment was a great one, and this is perfect. It ties exactly into what we said leading up to this fight, which is Jon Jones didn't take any damage fighting Cyril Gane. And we said if Sergei can go out there and not take any damage, or Curtis Blaydes for that matter, they could probably move into a pretty quick title fight since Stipe and Jon Jones just can't seem to get it right. Now, that's exactly what happened. Sergei got the night done real early. And I will say that, you know, he looked really sharp in there, and he probably would present a lot of problems as far as the power with his striking goes when it comes to Jon Jones, because when you talk about Jon Jones, he's a long, lanky fighter who can finish anybody. But that was at 205, and now you've got these durable bodies at 265. And I'm pretty sure Sergei cuts quite a good bit of weight to make the heavyweight limit. I saw him in person. He's at least, 6'5" or something like that. He's huge. So John's not going to have much of a size advantage on him, and I don't think he's going to have a strength advantage. Obviously, John's got more skills as far as all the martial arts go, but if he keeps it standing with Sergei Pavlovich, he could find himself getting rocked early on just like Curtis did. And then instead of grappling with him like he did with Cyril Gane very early, once you get cracked, your wrestling goes from collegiate level like John's is down to about high school level. And then you get cracked a couple more times, and then it looks like you've never wrestled a day in your life. Curtis Blaydes is a phenomenal wrestler, but he shot for those wrestling takedowns too late. He had started shooting for them after he'd already been rocked a couple of times. And once we saw him miss that, you're like, okay, well, now it's over because he's not going to get Sergei to the ground. Sergei's able to see these shots coming from a mile away. He's able to shuck him off, and then he's landing these vicious jabs, these vicious long strikes. And it was only a matter of time before he got him out of there. So props to Pavlovich. I think he is the absolute next best person in line to fight Jon Jones. And I hope that they make that fight soon. I'd love to see it on International Fight Week in July.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. Jon just fought. The schedules kind of match up. Neither one of them took any damage. They both got the job done in the first round. And listen, I'm as big of a Stipe Miocic fan as anybody is.
Right.
But what are we doing putting Jon in there with Stipe right now? I mean, I get that there's the name recognition. He's the greatest heavyweight of all time, and Jon is the greatest fighter of all time. And so there's a marketing sort of masterpiece that you could put together there. But let's get real for a minute and talk about how close is Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic actually as a fight. And I really don't think it's that close. Stipe, his best days are a couple of years behind him. He had that brutal loss to Francis. He's 40 years old. You mentioned a size and strength advantage that Jon would not have against Sergei. He would have against Stipe. So you have a technical advantage, a size advantage, a strength advantage, a length advantage, an age advantage, on and on and on and on, which doesn't really make Stipe Miocic versus Jon Jones all that compelling, to me at least. Maybe I'm just missing the mark here, but to me, the way better fight to make is Jon versus Pavlovich, because Pavlovich is in his early 30s. He's big, he's strong, he's got a lot of good years left in front of him. Neither one of them took any damage. It lines up for International Fight Week. That should be the headline main event. If I'm the matchmakers right now, I'm going back and I'm getting on the phone with Jones's people and Sergei's people and saying, what do we need to do to make this fight happen? Because that is a mega fight.
Absolutely. And Stipe's probably got some ring rust. I mean, we haven't seen him competing and being a very active fighter in many years. And you've got Pavlovich, who's just fought and looked really good doing it. He doesn't have any ring rust because he's been, pretty active throughout ever since he really cracked into the top 10. And then Jon Jones, I guess he's not really one of those people that gets plagued with ring rust. I mean, maybe he does, but he did just fight, and I know it didn't last long, so he probably didn't get to feel all of the things that he wanted to feel inside the octagon. But Jon Jones is a seasoned vet who's done it all, and he's been more active recently than Stipe, so I think that's just the best direction they can go. And look, the Stipe fight's always going to be there for him, but I think the only reason that Stipe was the guy that they were trying to make it happen for was so Jon can go steal that greatest heavyweight of all time, ranking out of Stipe's hands. And then it's kind of more of a story for Jon rather than a story of the fight, because I'm kind of leaning with you where I think Jon would be the favorite for that fight, and for good reason. I think he would likely get the job done on Stipe Miocic. And while I would say the same thing about him fighting Pavlovich, I just don't know if it would be as much of a gimme fight. And I hate to say that when you're talking about Stipe, because I love Stipe Miocic so much, but I just don't see him putting up as much of a fight against Jon Jones as Pavlovich or Curtis Blaydes for that matter. And obviously Curtis has some soul searching to do. He's got to go figure out how he can avoid these power fighters, these power punchers, I should say, and get back into the winning column. But I do think that Pavlovich versus Jon Jones International Fight Week would be the best direction the UFC's heavyweight division can go. Who knows what they'll do, but I think they have similar minds to us, and they'll probably do something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the night definitely belonged to Sergei. That was very, very impressive. And for Curtis, as you said, he's got some soul searching to do. His Achilles heel is the power punchers. Yeah. He just simply, and now having been knocked out by Francis and Derek Lewis, and that Derek Lewis one was brutal, and then those follow-up shots were just ugly. And now Pavlovich, it's like, how many more knockouts? I mean, if you had to look of all people who have been knocked out by people in the history of the UFC, you got to put Curtis towards the top of that list for who's gotten it the worst. Yeah. I mean, Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, Sergei Pavlovich now.
Yeah, and the list can pretty much stop after those first two. You're talking about the heaviest puncher of all time in Francis Ngannou, and then the knockout king of the UFC in Derek Lewis.
Right.
Like, it doesn't need to go any further. Now that we've added a crazy, scary Russian to the list and a couple of other bad knockouts, like, we don't need to add any more insult to injury. Curtis Blaydes has had the roughest schedule as far as his losses go in the entire UFC's career or history, in my opinion.
By the way,